We ask the question, what is needed in the world?
It's been described as an earthquake. The landslide victory of the far-right National Front in France's European Parliament elections is sending shockwaves through the country and across Europe. The party's charismatic leader, Marine Le Pen, was already emboldened by a solid performance in local elections back in March. Now she is savouring the moment as her anti-Euro National Front becomes the leading party in France. Her first move, a call for the dissolution of the French National Assembly, provides a foretaste of the uncompromising and controversial policies she can be expected to pursue on both the domestic and European scene. But what does the advance of nationalist parties with their anti-immigration and anti-European sentiments mean for France and Europe as a whole? We've put these questions to Bernard-Henri Lévy, one of France's most high-profile intellectuals and a self-styled philosopher. A best-selling author and political activist, he has courted controversy through his involvement in anti-government uprisings in several Arab countries. He's been criticised for interfering in French national affairs and leading the country to war in Libya by pushing President Nicolas Sarkozy to take military action. Other philosophers and academics accuse him of vanity and lack of rigour. Of Jewish origin, Lévy says of himself that he's a Republican, an atheist and a secularist. Now Bernard-Henri Lévy tells Al Jazeera he feels France's Republican values are at stake, threatened by those like Marine Le Pen, who claim to be defending the country's national identity. Bernard-Henri Lévy, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera. I'm interested to know, how would you define the role of a philosopher in the 21st century?
To make philosophy, to write books, and when he can, to implement his ideas, not to keep them in the sky of pure ideas, to go on the ground and to implement them, if he can.
Where would you say then the activism or lobbying ends and philosophy begins?
I begin with philosophy and I finish with philosophy. In between lobbying, I don't know what it means. Intervene, this belongs to my definition of philosophy. I am an activist philosopher. For me, I remain in my role of philosopher writer when I go to Tripoli or to Benghazi to help the revolutionary movement against Gaddafi, or when I go in Kiev on the Maidan to address the people of Maidan, I keep rolling my way of doing philosophy.
If we could talk then about values and political values here in France. We've seen the victory of the far-right National Front led by Marine Le Pen. How do you explain that vote? Do you think it's merely a protest vote? People are dissatisfied with President François Hollande? Or is there something more fundamental there?
I think it is more fundamental. I think that it is too easy to say that these voters are abused, gentle voters abused by a bad Marine Le Pen, by a bad witch. No, this is not true. The voters know what they do. In France, I know my country. Those who vote for Marine Le Pen know exactly who she is. They know that when she goes to Vienna, she dances with neo-Nazis. They know that she has in her party some people nostalgic of Hitlerism. I published in my magazine, my quarterly, La Règle du Jeu, a series of portraits, of profiles, of candidates to the last election, and all of them had very bad things in their track record. Corruption, transporting some weapons in their trunk or car, neo-Nazis, activism, and so on. So this is the party of Marine Le Pen. There is Marine Le Pen on one side who tries to be politically correct. People behind are completely incorrect, and voters know that.
So what are you saying? Are you saying then that there is a strong fascistic element here in France, and that Marine Le Pen is merely giving expression to that?
That there is, yes. a sort of fascist ground which can be more or less thick in this country. Sometimes the mud is very low, and sometimes it's a little higher. We had time in our history, at the time of the Dreyfus affair, half of the France was devoted to this pre-fascist ideology in the beginning of 20th century, Dreyfus affair. In the time of Pétain, when France was under occupation, 80% of France was happy to go to embrace the ideology of Marshal Pétain, not only because they were weak and forced by Hitler. No, they wished that. Today, we are not at this point, far from that, but there is probably, yes, 15, 20% of French people who vote for a neo-fascist or crypto-fascist party, knowing what they do, yes, on purpose.
Now, Marine Le Pen, as you said, has been trying to give this appearance that she's more mainstream, but from what you're saying, it sounds as though you don't believe that there's actually any fundamental change at all from when her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, ran the party. I
think that the DNA is the same. The track record of 50 of the candidates of Marine Le Pen, those 50, all of them are really dirty people on corruption ground, on violence, on neo-Nazis inclination, and so on. So, of course, I'm not thinking. The fact is that the party is completely corrupted, still as it was under Jean-Marie Le Pen, by these sort of, if you can call that ideas.
If I can just quote you something that she said, Marine Le Pen, shortly before the local elections. France has Christian roots. The French want to recognise their own country, recognise their lifestyle, recognise their traditions. Does she not have a point in any of those observations that she makes?
No, because of course France has Christian roots, but France has Jewish roots and France has Muslim roots too. There is a real, in the history of France, there is also an influence of Islam. In all Europe, the Greek philosophy, as you know well, was transmitted partly by Arabic thinkers, and not even quoting Spain, which has a deep Muslim background. So you cannot say, if you say that Europe is a Christian territory, you de facto exclude, first, a lot of people, and second, a big part of our common memory. More, and even more, there is also a secular tradition in France. What does it mean, Christian roots? Me, for example, I am a child, a disciple of the Enlightenment, of Diderot, of Voltaire. I don't feel represented when these people say Christian roots. No, I have Jewish roots, and I have secular, atheist roots, which is also part of the French history.
Now, in the past, when the National Front has presented a major challenge, I'm thinking particularly of 2002 when Jean-Marie Le Pen, the father, got through to the second round of the presidential elections, we saw a kind of coming together, a rallying of mainstream political forces on the left and the right to block a victory, kind of defending the Republican ideals of secularism, diversity, integration. But that didn't happen during local elections, and we did see the National Front taking over a number of towns. In a way, did you see this as some kind of a defeat for Republican values? Some kind of defeat, yes. Partly defeat. The headquarters of the parties were clean, were okay. But in the local level, yes, there was little arrangements. But it's always a mistake. It's always a mistake. You know, each time that the traditional right, the Republican right, makes a compromise with extreme right, it is a defeat for her. Extreme right wins always when the right tries to make a compromise. And when the left tries to play with the fire of extreme right, which happens also, it's always at her expense
of the left.
And of course, one of those topics that they tend to focus on is the topic of immigration. I mean, France has followed this formula whereby immigrants should integrate, should espouse the values of the French Republic, whereas other countries have tried different techniques. For example, in the United Kingdom, there's more an idea of multiculturalism. Do you think it's time for Europe as a whole to look at the way in which it deals with immigration?
No, I think it's time to mix the two models, integration and I am a Republican. I believe that immigrants have to share the general ground of values which makes French Republic. On the other side, you cannot compel anyone to change his mind, to convert to something else. You know, so the real model is in between. In the public space, as far as the public world is concerned, 100% integration. As far as the private life is concerned, the faith of everyone, the customs of everyone have to be respected. This is the way a proper country has to deal with immigration.
When it comes to immigration, though, is there an argument at all that in some cases the migrant community itself bears a responsibility for how people feel about it? For example, demanding halal food in school canteens?
In France, the school is a Republican institution. So I believe that the food must be same for all. Then you have private schools, which are sponsored by the state for Jewish worshippers, for Muslim worshippers, and so on. You have this possibility in France, but there is a law which is that in the public space, you cannot come with a burqa, you cannot, this example.
If we could come on now to the subject of the controversial French comedian Mbala Dieudonné. Some people might say he's not a comedian, but again, Manuel Valls, when he was previously Interior Minister, used the route of the courts to actually silence Dieudonné and prevent him from going on tour with his shows. Do you feel that that course of action was justified?
Yeah. Manuel Valls was absolutely... Because he is no longer a comedian. He is no longer a comedian. He is now a racist and anti-Semitic activist. And those who bought some tickets to go and see him in the city of Nantes knew again that they were going to attend a fascist meeting.
Well, I was outside that theatre and talked to some of the people, and they said, we're not fascists. He's anti-establishment. He's provocative. He's maybe.
When he asked, liberate Fofana. I don't know. He's not just a comedian. You know who is Fofana?
Yes, I do.
Fofana is the chief of the gang of the barbares, le gang des barbares.
Who was accused of instigating
Not
the
accused.
murder.
No. Not accused.
Convicted.
He's convicted, and he's in jail for a very long term for having kidnapped, tortured to death, and killed a young Jew because he was Jew, Ilan Halimi. One of the claims of Balambala in this meeting was the liberation of Fofana. So the people who come to see him cannot say that they are not just coming to see an anti-establishment guy. They know that they are going to see a man who is campaigning for the liberation of a big criminal, a big sort of monster. They know that.
Nevertheless, are we not starting to get onto dangerous territory now where politicians decide who has a right to speak and who doesn't?
No, it is not politicians. It was Conseil Constitutionnel, the highest institution of the French Republic. There is an...
But hold on, a lower court first of all said that the show could go ahead, and then Manuel Valls intervened and the higher courts...
No. Manuel Valls did not intervene. The higher court is the higher court...
Was seized by Manuel Valls.
As it has to be in French Republic, but their expression is completely free, they are independent, they are sovereign, and they said that this meeting could not take place. In France, there is there should be an absolute freedom of speech, absolute, except when call to murder, racism, and anti-Semitism is concerned. It is the only limit. There is one limit to freedom of speech, which is this one. You can say anything on French TV if you are hired by TF1 tomorrow or France 2. You can express whatever you want, except racism, anti-Semitism, and call to murder against Arabs or Jews. This in France is forbidden. It is the law. It is the law.
If we can talk then about Ukraine. Obviously, you were very active in the Maidan protest movement and the support of the government of Yatsenyuk. Yet now we're looking at the backlash, this standoff between Russia and the West. Where do you see this standoff heading? What could the potential ramifications be?
I hope there will not be ramification. I hope Europe and America will understand that they take a huge risk if they do not stop Putin. Putin, as all dictators, will go as far as he can, as far as he can, as far as we allow him to go.
But hold on, Putin would argue that what happened in Crimea was actually just a case of self-determination. He would say that people wanted to join Russia, they voted to join Russia, and there have already been the precedents of Bosnia and Kosovo. Doesn't he have a point?
No. Kosovo is completely different. Kosovo was separated from Serbia. Why? Because there was a bloodbath, because there was a mass murder. International community decided to bless the wish of independence of Kosovo people after thousands and thousands of dead, thousands and thousands of rivers of blood. When a people faces a dictator and wants to withdraw from the dictatorship, then we have the duty to support. But Crimea was not under threat by Kiev. There was not, the people of Ukraine were not preparing a massacre in Crimea. So the act of Putin is just banditism in disguise of autodetermination. The comparison with Kosovo is absolutely unfair.
But, you're describing Putin as being this big threat, and yet is he not in some way articulating ideas or desires that we see throughout Europe, maybe desires to return to, let's say, Christian values, traditional values?
Probably you are right, he echoes some concerns and some counter values, I don't call that values, which are running throughout Europe. Okay, but I'm against them. I don't feel that it is the progress of humanity to go back to nationalism, to go back to closing the minds, and to articulate that with what happened in Chechnya. Putin, for me, revealed his true face when at the moment of the First and the Second War in Chechnya, which is a forgotten disaster in Europe. Europe does not care, did not care. Europe said, okay, it's the problem of Putin, it's not our business. And with this way of reasoning, they let a city, modern city, Grozny, face a disaster which we never saw since Second World War. So for me, Putin is a traditional, probably, Eurasian, for sure, mixed with a dictator, and more than a dictator, a sort of butcher. What happened in Chechnya is butchery. It's not even war. It's not a proper war.
There are some in the West who are evoking the idea of a new Cold War. Do you see it that way, or is that overstating the case?
You have to ask the question to Putin, not to the West. The West is willing and ready for peace. The West really believed in a sort of general appeasement following the fall of the Berlin Wall 25 years ago. Putin relaunched the war. Putin relaunched an old aggressivity against Europe. If you see the ideology of Putin today, because he's not only a man of coup de force, of putsch, he articulates some words and some concepts, and the core of his vision of the world is the hatred of European values, of democratic values, and of liberal commitments. This is the core of Putinism. So we have to stop that. We don't want to be contaminated by that. I don't want it, at least for my country and the Europe which I will leave to my children.
So you don't see it as a new Cold War. I mean, the Cold War was characterized by an opposition of capitalism and communism. So what would you say?
There is a new opposition.
What's the new opposition? What are the ideologies now?
The new opposition is opposition between democracy and opposition to and tyranny, opposition between European values and what Putin calls Eurasian ideology. This is a new opposition. On one side, good governing, fight against corruption, human rights. On the other side, corruption, governing based upon bribery, human rights completely dishonored every day, murder of journalists who are too much free, like Anna Politkovskaya, and so on. This is two visions of the world, probably as far away from each other as capitalism was from communism.
We've seen how you've been able to bring influence to bear on French foreign policy, particularly you mentioned Libya, but less so in the case of Syria. Were you disappointed by the decisions of France and by the United States when it came to how far they were willing to put pressure in Syria?
Of course I was disappointed, more than that. I was depressed and angry. Against France, yes, but more against America. This famous Black Saturday, end of August, or end of August, when Obama, in the same afternoon, said that what was happening in Syria was unbearable, but that a few hours after, he will wait before deciding that the Congress will express blah, blah, blah. This day was a day of shame for the Obama presidency. And I was, like many Americans, many Europeans, many citizens of the world, deeply disappointed by Barack Obama this day. Less by Hollande. Hollande was ready to intervene. Hollande was ready to implement, even by force, the right not to be killed of the people. But there was this, at this moment, a real responsibility of America. The first responsibility, by the way, was this story of Red Line. When Obama said that the use of chemical weapons was the red line, it was a very bad day, because it meant that till chemical weapons, it's okay. You can kill as many Syrian people as you wish, as long as it is not by chemical weapons. This, I felt it already very strange and very unfair and very un-American and undemocratic.
Have you ever thought of taking a more active role in politics, for example, maybe even standing for office yourself?
No. One reason is that I would be unable. But number two, more important, I think that I do more in my position than if I were in charge. I'm not sure that if I had been under minister of this or that, I could have brought to François Hollande Petro Poroshenko, the next president of Ukraine. I'm not sure that I could have convinced Nicolas Sarkozy during the war in Libya to send weapons to Misrata or to open a new front in the Jebel Nafousa if I had been in his government. To be free is my way probably of being efficient and to be useful to my fellow humans.
Thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.